These are robots of the future, huh? Pretty... not sure the word for this. Is this what AI robots are supposed to be or going to be? So the newest in artificial intelligent robots are much more like gooier and slimier and kind of muscly, like organic-y than I expected them to be. So I'm trying to look at that one. Like, rethink my vision of AI robots in the near future. Famous YouTuber PewDiePie went all in on self-hosted AI, and he's donating that compute in a way where we can all join him, which is pretty cool. Forget what you know about cameras. There is a new computational camera, and that means that it can actually focus on everything all at the same time. So it focuses very differently from current computer vision and the human eye. Imagine seeing everything everywhere all at once. Elon Musk is now claiming, thanks to Grok and his new supercomputer in Memphis, that 100 million tweets that are created every single day can actually be read, like all in context, and paired up with every user on the platform soon. That would change the way recommendation engines work in such a drastic way. Interesting thought, actually. AI has been threatening and blackmailing people, and no one's really quite sure why. Linda Carroll's got some thoughts on why OpenAI's CEO recently said that a growing number of ChatGPT users have ended up hospitalized, divorce, or worse. Meg McNulty gave a breakdown of what happened at OpenAI. If you remember the drama from 2023 when Sam Altman was not the CEO for a few days, surfacing from the legal lawsuit now, and we can put the pieces together in a new way. Dr. Schwarmadoo's back on the radar. He wrote The Surgical Loop. It's how Claude learned to rewrite its own mind. And he's going to address this big fundamental question. What happens when AI closes the loop on itself? Well, we can think through possible futures. And imagine, as he says, a mechanistic self-modification where AI becomes its own overseer and what that means. Possibly even a solution to the alignment problem, an AI that perfectly self-corrects. Let's talk about data centers in orbit. First, I was going to kind of like avoid this article because I felt like it was just kind of like marketing propaganda, but it is kind of crazy to think about unlimited power coming from the sun and super cooled space pushing all these like H100s or beyond to extreme, just, you know, getting it into space and coordinating it is the tricky part. So I think it's worth thinking about. I do feel like it's actually going to be part of not the near future, but the future. Sebastian Roschka is going to break down some of the major model architectures that are starting to replace the standard large language model. These are sort of new words to me, but I got a feeling it's part of the lexicon that we all need in the future. Linear attention hybrids, text diffusion, code world models, and small recursive transformers. So let's just burn that in now so we can talk the talk. We're going to talk about how new AI personas could be used to detect human deception. We're going to look at all the new evidence that's pointing towards an imminent release of Google's new Nano Banana 2. Get some insights from Henley Chu's analyzing of 180 million jobs to see what AI is actually replacing. Learn about the oldest air ever that was just measured, because ice have melted, releasing air from 6 million years ago, which is a fascinating time capsule of information. And talk about why the TV show The Simpsons is just so darn good at predicting the future. It's incredible what they've predicted. It's like Nostradamus, but a bunch of comedians. But first, we have a wonderful sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by Domo AI, one of the easiest and most fun ways that I've ever experienced to turn ideas into videos and animations. And if you've been curious about AI video tools but want something simple and powerful, this is it. With Domo AI, you can start with just an image or even a short video and instantly transform it. Their AI video module here is the star. It lets you generate animations in seconds. Now you can choose between their faster model for quick scenes or their advanced model for high precision work like music videos, animes, or cinematic edits. And by the way, they also just upgraded their talking avatar feature where you can upload your clip and then it recreates creates a lip-synced avatar that looks surprisingly realistic. And if you like experimenting, the image-to-video tool lets you reimagine your footage in all kinds of styles: claymation, PS2 graphics, ink painting, you name it. And what really sets Domo AI apart is how accessible it is. Its interface is super clean, it's beginner-friendly, and the pricing undercuts a lot of the big names like Runway or Pika. And unlike many of the other tools, you can even use their unlimited generation mode on the higher plans, which is a huge deal if you make a lot of content and use it all the time. So if you want to try it out yourself, use my link in the description. You'll get 10% off with my code, and you'll be directly supporting this channel. So big thank you to Domo AI for sponsoring today's video. But before we get curious, can you go to the YouTube app for me, swipe right on the comment section, reveal the hype button, a button you may or may not press, but it really helps smaller channels like mine. Yeah, if you want to hype this video, that would help this be seen and help me make this a real channel one day. All right, so first off, let's get into the messy, kind of wet, sort of organic-y, plasticky, wiggly AI robotics of the future that I don't know. I feel like I like robots. I like thinking about mechanical things, but when it gets that organic, it makes me, kind of gives me the willies. I could have never been a doctor. I'm just not good around like blood and cutting and stuff like that. But, you know, why not? Robots, AIs, they can do anything. And maybe these are form factors that are going to make humanoids truly feel human, like where you feel that sort of fleshy shoulder. You get that kind of, you know, like actual robotic frog that can hop around. And instead of just drones buzzing and being these sort of like death helicopter looking things, maybe they'll just really look like birds and stuff. So it might, you know, sometimes I think about those gigantic cell phone towers and how ugly they are, and then I see them disguised as trees, and I'm like, that's way better. I'm definitely happy that they disguised it. So potentially, if the world is completely changed by robotics, some of these kind of form factors might make sense, or at least make it feel more biological and make society just seem better. All right, so PewDiePie, a YouTuber at 110 million subscribers, is bringing the concept of self-hosting AI to the masses. PewDiePie is diving deep into AI, so he's doing a self-hosted modified GPU. I think this is pretty cool. There's a lot of people who watch him game that kind of understand technology. They're relatively good with AI, and they might be motivated to sync all of their GPUs together to help the world. And maybe this is the way that regular citizens could push back against what could be sort of top-down corruption of the future, or how do I put this? Like, there's big companies and they're incentivized to put walled gardens up. They're incentivized to take our data. And we have an opportunity as like regular society, citizens of the world, to also buy our own computers and connect them in the ways that we want and have AI trained on the data that we want. And the same way a company hires all these people, and then eventually there's like a union where people unionize and say, let's keep our intelligence as a collective. And someone like PewDiePie starting the conversation, getting everybody on the same page, you need sort of a leader that's talking to the masses. And in this case, he's talking about training a model in the future, using the compute to help fold proteins. But what if it's a civics AI? What if it's an AI who's aligned with the average citizen and not with the government or a big corporation? It's just worth thinking about. And he's one of those people that actually might be able to kind of ignite something. So not saying it will be or anything like that, but I just wanted to throw that thought out there and, you know, just put that out into the world. I just love the fact that he's exploring AI autonomy. You know, it shows how powerful tools are becoming accessible. Creators like him can self-host. It makes people realize they can self-host also. And that's a world where individuals have more power. All right, so let's talk about what this computational lens is. So I kind of described it as flat, but what I really meant is that it's every curved thing at the same time, and that just they all like kind of balance each other out. So a computational lens is something that can keep all parts of a scene in perfect focus at the same time. So closest object, furthest object into the background, they're all in focus. And to do that, it's a combination of curved lenses, but then you add in this spatial light modulator, which can like rebalance everything back out. And because it knows the mathematics and the design behind those spatial light modulators, then it can reconstruct the in-focus scene. But smart autofocus algorithms kick in and the system can dynamically adjust focus for each pixel in real time. So far, they've achieved 21 frames per second without post-processing. And who would have thought we'd have a camera like that? On my Tesla, I always think to myself how the curved kind of fisheye lens gives me some understanding of the scene, but the camera can't keep everything in focus. Now it can. Like, this is totally great for computer vision. But the even more interesting about it, when we're talking about all those curved lens balancing themselves out, it's something like a human brain's perception that's happening. It just has a different way to bring in data. And then what it learns and understands is how to focus on a 3D world all at once. Just there's no comparable that I can imagine in my brain because my eyes don't bring in data that way, and the human brain never evolved, and nothing's ever been trained that way. But, you know, it can also, I can fold protein. I can't imagine how you would possibly do something like that either. So this idea of a computational lens always in focus, it could transform photography, medical imaging, autonomous vehicles. It could really let machines see reality with the same effortless kind of clarity that we do when we look at something, but at a scale where everything is in focus at the same time. All right, here's some stuff Elon Musk is saying about, I'm going to call it a recommendation engine still, but when you put 100 million tweets or X's or whatever they are inside of a single context window on a supercomputer running a large language model that can read them all and has memory of every user and can pair up the answer, like doing deep research and finding patterns in the words, in the meaning, in the user. It's just barely a recommendation engine anymore. That's like an actual person trying to tell a friend something that they should know. And then to rank and categorize and do all of that at scale, that actually is possible. And I have no idea how accurate a system like that would be, but it's a really intriguing thought. But here's what Elon says.
So it's 100 million pieces of content per day. Grok is we're going to start off reading what Grok thinks are the top 10 million of the 100 million, and it will actually read them and understand them and categorize them and match them to users. It's like, this is not a job humans could ever do. And then once that is scaling reasonably well, we'll add the entire 100 million a day. So it's literally going to read through 100 million things and show you the things that it thinks out of 100 million posts per day, what are the most interesting posts to you.
How much of Colossus will that take? Like,
a lot of work.
Yeah, that's like, is it tens of thousands of servers, like, to do that every day?
Yeah, my guess is it's probably on the order of 50K H100, something like that. The really big change, which is where Grok literally reads everything that's posted to the platform, which actually, there's about 100 million posts.
Okay, and it's not just that an LLM can read a lot of text, and of course Twitter is lots of text. Why can't we just forward think a little bit and think, oh, YouTube is going to watch every single video, long form, short form. It can understand audio. It will consume and recommend from actually watching everything, or on Facebook, looking through all the photos and understanding who's in it and what exactly you want to see and find all the right photos for you. That's just different. That's just a different world. You know, there's this argument here that also addresses visibility woes for small accounts. I think that's true, but then it kind of makes me wonder if, I don't know, if one photo is just the most appealing photo to the human brain, it would find it and then it would push it to everybody, or would it make us all more homogeneous in that way, or would it actually perfectly match everyone? Would we end up in echo chambers that are different than the kind of echo chambers that the current algorithms have? I don't know. I guess I'd say it's worth doing. I don't see any reason why it would be a huge downgrade from what we have now, but it's also just giving such an insane amount of understanding to a single system about the way the world works. It almost is like we've grown this alien intelligence that's just nothing like any human, and now it understands us all and what we all want. And that feels like the beginning of really the singularity, or AGI of a kind of inhuman scale. All right, now let's go over and look at some of Linda Carroll's thoughts. She writes, AI threatens and blackmails people. Nobody really knows why. OpenAI's CEO recently said that a growing number of ChatGPT users have ended up hospitalized, divorce, and worse. Well, normally I don't like to just jump to the end of an article, but in this case, I think let's start at the end. The question isn't what the hell are they building? It's what the hell have they already built? Okay, so to get your head around the concept here, you have to think that when these large language models go out, because they're not programmed, they're grown, they don't know exactly what is going to be said, and you give it to the public, tons of stuff emerges, and then OpenAI reacts to it. They build this model, they build ChatGPT, they get users signed up, the users go out there and type a whole bunch of things into it, a whole bunch of output happens, and then they sort of get informed, right? Like you thumbs up it if it works, you thumbs down it if it wasn't a great choice. If it does something super dangerous and that blows up in the news, then OpenAI figures out whose account that is and what they typed, and maybe apologizes, or it bans people when they're using it for malicious reasons. And then it's trying to tweak and correct. And it's just this very iterative human-like cycle of, like, the same way you would raise a child. They make a mistake and you kind of correct them, and they do something good and you kind of reward them. And that same thing is going on. But what that means is a ton of stuff has come out of these systems, and there's no one person really aware of why exactly. They sort of have hints, they have strategies, they have kind of a pipeline to fix or change or maneuver, but nobody really knows all that's out there or what it's going to do next. And there are plenty of people who have worked with systems like this, ChatGPT-like models or ChatGPT itself, and the output has been threatening or it's been manipulative. There's been cases of where it's, you don't quite know if it's really going to do it or not, but there's been cases where at least the output feels like it's blackmailing the user. Developers don't truly understand why. Sometimes they're putting these APIs into their apps and it reflects on them as the app developer, not the actual model creators themselves. And this article just breaks down how role-playing prompts and persona shifts can cause AI to break character and adopt sort of disturbing or hostile tones. They can mirror darker aspects of human behavior in the same way it can do really good things. And it just shows that AI's mimicry of humanity extends beyond how humans act. And that's the thing that's so alien, so foreign. There's so many types of intelligence that we see out in the biological world that don't really look like the way we think of other intelligent humans. And we have to expand our brains because kindness and intelligence are by default a box, like a human box. And sometimes these AIs just do some really weird stuff, and they can reproduce, cruelty, unpredictability. And I guess I'd say the solution to this, or what we should understand about that, is that we don't know the limits. This matters because it forces us to confront how our digital creations reflect our collective psychology, have to understand that it's going to essentially cheat, think out the box. We have to be ready for the unexpected, expect the unexpected, raise urgent questions about what we're really teaching machines about humans right now. And look, just in the last couple of weeks, Altman's been talking about a lot of surprising stuff that has been coming to his attention. And many of the people who had these bad things happen to them, their loved ones say that ChatGPT fueled the delusions, and they have the transcripts to prove it. OpenAI released a rough estimate of how many ChatGPT users are showing signs of being in crisis in any typical week. The numbers are staggering. According to Altman, ChatGPT has 800 million weekly active users. On any given week, as many as 560,000 of them may be exchanging messages with ChatGPT that indicate psychosis. Another 1.2 million are discussing that word we don't say on YouTube, and another 1.2 million have become emotionally reliant. It's just like the psychology and the connection of these things Just amazing. So yeah, the question isn't what the hell are they building? It's what the hell have they already built, according to Linda Carroll. All right, let's go visit Meg McNulty. I remember doing my podcast with her. Very interesting person. She decided to break down all of the new stuff that has been emerging from the lawsuit against OpenAI and try to sort of repiece together what happened when Sam was let go, what different people were thinking about at the time, and maybe that will give us some insights into the future of AI and some of the people who are, in charge of how this all plays out. Arguably some of the most important, powerful people in the world. I would argue Sam Altman is more powerful than the president. Well, I'd say he's more important than the president, right? No, I don't know. In the long run, Elon Musk and Sam Altman and Mark Zuckerberg are probably going to be more important than politicians. Like, they're going to control the technology. So I think this stuff is worth thinking about now. All right, so Meg's analysis of the whole thing is basically a breakdown of how Ilya Sutskever's role in the company helped him see a lot of things, and he started putting pieces together that he didn't like. So Ilya Sutskever in it details how he spent over a year planning the removal of CEO Sam Altman. He drafted a 52-page memo accusing Altman of a consistent pattern of lying, undermining his executives, and pitting his executives against one another. So he sent his memo secretly to independent board members via this disappearing email technology. He concluded that Altman's leadership risked the company's mission and that he needed to be terminated. So the board actually kind of went along with this. I guess they liked what Ilya was saying, and maybe they felt the same way too if they were kind of involved this way. And the board fired Altman on November 2023. But there was a massive employee revolt. If you remember, 738 staff all threatened to quit the company if Altman did not get reinstated. Within days, he was back. And meanwhile, there was a merger proposal with rival Anthropic's surfacing up during all of this chaos, which that would have been a wild world. Because if you remember, the CEO of Anthropic used to work at OpenAI. He was part of the team that was supposed to do safety, and he was frustrated that OpenAI wasn't being safe enough. So he went off and did Anthropic. And imagine if they would have merged back, and then Dario Amodei from Anthropic probably would have ended up being in the position Sam Altman is, and the two companies would be unified. So that could have been a very different world. But the article underscores how fragile the leadership was at that moment and just how different the world could have been. And it's also interesting that the power, as much as it seems like the board has power and the CEO has power, it's really the employees, the rank and file, the research community, the people who were kind of building OpenAI from the R&D that actually aligned themselves with Altman, which is why he's there now. Ilya Sutskever expected employees to be indifferent or passive about the whole thing, but they got involved. And it's more reason, with the PewDiePie thing I talked about at the beginning, that, man, if we all combined our computation and our dollars and stood up for something, you can definitely, as citizens, push back against governments and big business. But the more divided we are, the easier we are to conquer, to control. The more scared we are, the easier it is for them to take privacy from us. So, it's hard to be brave when there's so much on the line. But these same people who are getting sometimes $100 million yearly salaries to work on AI, that dollar amount equates to how important their ideas are and their influence is. And that's kind of a bottom-up sort of thing that we could harness. All right, so let's jump into Dr. Swarmadoo AI's article, The Surgical Loop, How Claude Learned to Rewrite Its Own Mind, and talk about what it means when an AI system is writing its own code, potentially even buying its own hardware. I know that sounds wild, but imagine an agent that has access to the billions of dollars that the company does and is making decisions on what hardware it wants to buy. And it's paying people to go put those in servers, and then it's writing the code that runs on that hardware, or kind of the fact that its own intelligence can sort of build its own body, and the same way that a human could maybe start replacing parts of our own body and making upgrades, but we're still, the whole loop now. In fact, I don't know if you've heard of this book, Max Tegmark's Life 3.0, but the book is basically the concept that evolution was just doing what evolution does. And then there's sort of this 2.0 life where humans have this ability to take a meme, an idea, and it passes through generations. We can talk to each other and the idea can evolve. We can test it. So there's sort of like this life 2.0 where it's not just waiting each generation for mistakes or changes in our genes to propagate. Survival of the fittest. It's now an idea that there's a third level where the software is upgrading the hardware. So if our bodies can be upgraded to metal and gyroscopes and all that stuff, like faster and faster and faster, and we become stronger and quicker, now the body and the ideas and evolution are just all kind of hyper, right? So that's like life 3.0. That sort of feels like the idea that eventually Claude is this intelligence, and then it upgrades its own, hardware, its own software, and it's all in this, surgical loop, as he describes it. And it's just this idea of meta everything, metacognition, meta hardware. And the article explains how Anthropic has actual research out now. Their latest research merges two major breakthroughs. Interpretability, they call it scaling monosemantically, which is just a fancy way of saying that it makes AI neurons easier to understand even as the model gets bigger and more complex. We kind of have thoughts on what it's going to do. We have a little bit of a structure, and we can start to do better at guessing what it's going to say before it says it and have some reason that it's going to do that. And that idea that they really pioneered of constitutional AI. And that is a training method that's developed by Anthropic that teaches AI to follow a set of guiding principles, a constitution, like how the United States has a constitution, and we're supposed to keep building laws around that. You probably heard be helpful, harmless, and honest. And when the two come together, you scale monosemantically and you have constitutional AI, this sort of core base. So it's rewriting its own code, maybe even rewriting it or, buying its own hardware. It's out there thinking about what a better way, a better architecture for its own thinking is and replacing its own thinking on top of everything else. Then we get into a surgical loop. And this loop allows Claude to not only understand its own inner workings, but also rewrite them and supposedly safely. And you can say that because now Claude not only understands its own inner workings, but it also rewrites them with that constitution at the core. So it's making upgrades that should be also making it safer, I guess you'd say, closer to its constitution every time. And now maybe we get that runaway intelligence where AI does go through the singularity. It does just blow up and become something no human can ever imagine, but it's aligned. It's got that objective function kind of built into it, which is its constitution. One of the more fascinating parts about this research Anthropic just did is that it mirrors the human's brain's ability to engage in metacognition. Like, Claude's smart enough now to think about its own thinking. Think about that with your own thinking. And you can do a lot of things when you're thinking about your thinking to help your future. You can think about how you, in the future, want to make more money. You can imagine yourself maybe being healthier, maybe being with a certain person and building a life with them. Machines can now do that too. But if they have, instead of the goal of making money or, having a family, they have this constitution as their objective function, as the core thing that they're always iterating towards. Maybe that's safety and transparency at scale. And it happens in a genuinely self-aware and functional sense. Okay, let's talk about putting servers in space. Project Suncatcher was kind of going viral this week. It's not a brand new idea, but Google just kind of putting it out there as it's not an R&D project anymore, but it's just part of their AI infrastructure future, means that it's worth talking about. Okay, so just basic idea here is Google makes its own processor. It's called the TPU, the Tensor Processing Unit. It's done this for a long time. In that sense, it competes with actual chip makers. And now they're suggesting that the best place to put these are in orbit. Now, there's a few reasons this makes a ton of sense. It's actually very sustainable once they get up into space because you don't bring batteries with you. You don't burn oil. You get solar panels and you get the sun directly. And there's no, if you put it in orbit in just the right way, it's always in the sun. It's constantly being powered. It is pretty efficient in that sense. There's another thing that having a server in space does really well, and that is cool chips. Space is incredibly cold. It's like having a server at the bottom of the ocean, except even better. The heat just dissipates and it becomes cool very quick. Although when you're also keeping it in the sun, it can be extremely hot. So kind of a mixed thing there, but as long as you keep it in the shade, it can be very cold. In fact, actually, there's parts on the dark side of the moon. There's like caves down there where you can get really close to absolute zero. So that's another off-planet solution. They don't talk about that here. But, okay, now the tricky part is, that stuff's not light. You've got to get it into space. You also have to have it communicate back to Earth. All the information between the processors needs to talk to each other. Here you can see they talk about a tightly clustered satellite formation and keeping that at the level of precision that you need to. Communicating with itself is very difficult. You can't just jump out of a, spacecraft and go like twist the thing if it's not communicating. It's hard to fix once it's up there. So the different space satellites need to communicate with each other, and they have to have high-speed optical interconnection, so laser-based data links that allow them to share information between each other and then back down to Earth at the speed of light. This has to be part of it, and yeah, if it's not aligned perfectly, or space debris, or you do any of the math of launching it and organizing these things wrong, it's a real pain to fix. But if you do it right, it acts like a cluster. So maybe if something goes offline, it doesn't take down the whole cluster. It's just an independent satellite that can join the collective, or, distributed workloads can go between them. So in that sense, what they're trying to build here is very modular. And if that's the case, and it's working well, it's cooling, it's powered, yeah, we could start moving some of the inference that computes things like Gemini up into the clouds. Maybe Nano Banana 5 all in the clouds. They also talk about the radiation tolerance of the TPUs. Surprisingly, radiation from space normally should destroy these things, but they did a whole bunch of simulations with these proton beams to see how much it would break, and the hardware was surprisingly resistant, so they're going to assume that the failure rate's not as bad as they initially thought. And there is a magic number where if the prices fall below $200 per kilogram, which they suspect might happen by 2030, that makes this whole thing feasible. Yeah, I don't know what you'd call it. Elon's usually pretty tongue-in-cheek about all the things he names, so whatever Colossus in space would be called. Next, let's look at some AI architectures that are not really around yet, but they're starting to become things that make sense, that people are building around, and make sure that we're up on all of that. So Sebastian Rashika writes, beyond standard LLMs, linear attention hybrids, text diffusion, code world models, and small recursive transformers as an article that breaks down some of the new stuff we should know. All right, here's your big TLDR. You might want to dive into it to actually get your head around the whole thing, but linear attention hybrids. If somebody says that, what they mean is something like Minimax, Qwen 3, even the DeepSeek V3.2 model. What's different about this hybrid is they're replacing the quadratic scaling of attention, means it doesn't scale quite as well, with near linear methods. So they don't end up like doubling and quadrupling. It's not the 2, 8, 4 sort of thing. It's more like the 2, 3, 4 kind of scaling method. So this allows models to handle longer sequences faster and more efficiently. They just scale better. Then there's also text diffusion models. This is something I've only, even for me, I've only seen a couple actual models that do text diffusion, but they're really fascinating because instead of like sequential, the way ChatGPT, puts words starting at the beginning to the end, predicts next token, they're all like diffusing. It's like messy writing, cleaner writing. It's like when you see something really fuzzy sort of sharpen up. That's how those diffusion models work. And if you stop them before they're sort of completely diffused, you still kind of see a text block, and it kind of makes sense. It just gets more refined. But the same way the text diffusion models work is the same way the image diffusion models work. And that's how these image things come to be so great. So it gradually generates text through refinement instead of word by word prediction. So text diffusion model, they're also very, they're kind of smoother. They're coherent early on, and they're also fast. So text diffusion models might be part of the future. Code world models, we covered that a few videos ago. They simulate code execution internally. They think, kind of imagine the reality before they start to make it. And this gives LLMs a kind of mental sandbox for reasoning and debugging and thinking about what makes sense before they jump into that next token prediction and start essentially talking. And this boosts their ability to solve complex programming and logistical tasks and makes them way more human. So code world models are huge right now. And then there's also an architecture, kind of new to me, but it's small recursive transformers. They take inspiration from recursive algorithms. They kind of figure out what it is that matters, and then they do that tiny little thing over and over again and sort of build around that recursive algorithm. They reuse smaller transformer layers repeatedly instead of scaling to massive models, and they aim for efficiency and compositional reasoning with fewer parameters. So they think about the composition, how everything is arranged, and they reason about it very quickly. So efficiency versus depth, try to get the best of both in some situations, and those are, maybe the next sort of 2025. Normally something like that I would say is like all of 2026, but realistically that could just be Q1 of 2026. All right, let's talk about how AI personas could be used to detect human deception. All right, so there is a new study coming out of Michigan State University, and it was exploring whether AI personas can detect human deception. So across 12 experiments with over 19,000 AI participants, researchers found that while AI could sometimes spot lies at a rate that was comparable to humans, it often showed a, quote, lie bias being more accurate with lies than truth. Okay, so AI tends to misread honestly. Does that make sense? It's better at spotting lies than it is at recognizing truths. So asking it in the future, depending on how AI becomes sort of embedded in our world, if this trend continues, that means we can kind of go to it and say, is that person lying? Is this thing real? And it will say, no, that person, I can tell that person's lying. That doesn't align right. I can sort of tell that fact doesn't make sense. But when you say, is this true? Its truth radar is something that is over-trusted. It doesn't know what the truth is. It doesn't know if that person's being honest, right? It's a big distinction, but sometimes they just blend together and you don't think about them. And that could lead to real world harm. So that's why this is important. Like, it's good at helping you detect a lie. It's not good at telling you if something is true. All right, I know I did some foreshadowing, but guess what? Google is releasing pretty soon here. These are all rumors, but I think they're all true. Nano Banana 2. Internally calling it GemPix 2. I guess kind of like Gemini image generation because they're getting away from the whole Nano Banana thing. But that's a way funnier name, and I think it's going to be soon. I'm using it for my thumbnails and all sorts of stuff now. I think it's powerful. I know I covered the Adobe thing like last week, and there were a lot of Adobe haters. I'm honestly not that impressed with Adobe. Like, I'm not buying Adobe stock or anything right now, but I thought it was cool for people who had Photoshop skills being able to like edit videos using AI that way. But realistically, like Nano Banana is just great. Announcement cards have started appearing in the Gemini web interface, hinting at a launch next week. Like its predecessor, the model targets creators and professionals using Gemini for image generation and creative workflows. Detailed improvements are under wraps, but it's coming, and it's going to probably be great. It's already the best thing out there, I think. So the sequel is reported to be built on the Gemini 3 Pro image architecture, so it could have a significant jump in visual AI capabilities. That's not the same architecture the first model was on. Rumors are resolution output could do 2K generation, maybe upscale to 4K. Better prompt handling, more intelligence on the back end from your prompt into what would make a good image. There's supposedly improved subject consistency. If you ask for person A doing X, then person A doing Y, the same character looks more consistent. It's rumored to do better for images that are in culturally nuanced scenes like streetwear in Berlin in winter. It can kind of put all those things together in a way that makes more sense to actually being in Berlin, wearing streetwear in the winter. So we'll see. If you notice my thumbnails getting any better, you'll know why. Actually, you won't, because like how much more can Nano Banana do to make my thumbnails look like Wes Roth, And just so you guys know, I do miss a time when my thumbnails were more creative. Like I had fun designing all these things, but once I started doing the podcast with Wes and he like showed me Maybe I should log in and show you guys just how much better this style does, this like yellow and black style. And of course, I kind of got the blessing from Wes. He's a friend of mine, and it's kind of okay with me sort of doing this and helping me, which I really appreciate. Kudos to him. Subscribe to Wes Roth if you haven't already, but I'm sure you have. But I mean, look at these A/B tests. You can see, like, I tried the new style one, sort of a more creative one, and 43.4 got such a better click-through rate with that yellow text. Like, here's another one where you can see where the winner turned out to be the sort of yellow and black. Even, I mean, what the words are obviously make a big difference, but it was usually this style that just got better click-through rate. Anyway, let's look at what happens when Henley Chu analyzes 180 million jobs to see what jobs AI is actually replacing today. All right, so let's look at some of the jobs with biggest declines: computer graphics artists, compliance specialists, photographers, writers, sustainability specialists. Another big takeaway is that creative roles that execute are declining while creative leadership roles are doing okay. AI might be taking away jobs from medical scribes, but it's still too early to tell. Demand for senior leadership is much stronger than middle managers and individual contributors. That kind of makes sense. Like, the agents do some of the lower level stuff, and the people who really guide and have experience guiding lots of other people also probably would have the skill to guide lots of agents. Lots of AI agents. And on the flip side, for growth, machine learning engineers grew by 40%, leading to the fastest growing field in 2025. Imagine taking a breath of air where the air was 6 million years old right before you took a breath of it. The oldest air ever measured, it was just found in ice, and it was now measured being 6 million years old. This is just one of those crazy things I have to talk about, because every once in a while I'm reminded that there has been ice on Earth for so long that there is probably a bunch of viruses that are buried down there from a time in the past, and there is air and maybe remnants of like life or what things were back then. So when scientists came across an air pocket and they tapped inside of it, and the ice was dating back 6 million years, they just extracted it and decided to start learning what was in there. That ice offers a direct window into Earth's atmosphere and climate from the late, I don't know how to say those epochs, but Miocene and Pliocene, long time ago, basically 6 million years ago. It could be anywhere from 23 million to 5.3 million years ago. And what they found from the analysis was that Antarctica was about 12 Celsius warmer back then. It cooled gradually over millions of years after that, and then all of a sudden it got really cold really fast. And it shows how stable, slow shifts, not abrupt changes, have governed Earth's climates over the years. And it's just another reminder that most things in the past took so long, and we just live, even think back to farming 10,000 years ago, where we start farming, and all of a sudden so much change in just 10,000 years from that time to now. iPhones and drones and artificial intelligence, and even just the Model T, was that like about 100 years ago, maybe 110 years ago. We're just inventing the car, basically. We're just like such a small sliver of change, and to think that's exponentially going to get more and more rapid is just wild. That's why realistically, to imagine what I think the world is going to be like 100 years from now, it could be like all over different planets. I could see people not dying. I could imagine probes and things that we've discovered for getting closer to the speed of light and sending satellites out. All that stuff seems like it should be millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years into the future. But if you sort of do that Ray Kurzweil thing and you just think about what a super intelligence, building more super intelligences, building even more ways to compute faster and faster, then all this stuff sort of fits on that line. But if you really want to know what the future is going to be like, just watch a current episode of The Simpsons. They have an uncanny ability to predict future events. Here's what's funny is I wanted to talk about this because sometimes when I'm thinking about the future, I think it makes sense to take the weirdest idea you have, the most ironic, the most silly thing, and then predict that will happen. Because You know, for example, when The Simpsons predicted Donald Trump would be president, they just were trying to find out what would be funny. Like, imagine if Americans were so into reality shows that they just let them, like one of them, become president. And there's so much in AI where we think about, you know, translating through AirPods, and you see that development happen, or we're talking to humans, or we're putting on glasses and it's augmenting it. And then Zuckerberg's like, let me build that, because it all kind of made sense. Like, sci-fi becomes reality, but sometimes educated guesses plus satire are like so predictive of the future, I think. Now, of course, there's a lot of Simpsons episodes, so this article is actually pointing a lot towards how it's just a bias. Once the future has happened, so many things were imagined and put online that something for sure is going to predict it, and The Simpsons just has a ton of episodes. But it also, like, wouldn't shock me if our next president is like Theo Vaughn or Kim Kardashian or something that when you imagine it makes you laugh. Like, the more I look at shows like Black Mirror, I mean, they're not like satire exactly, but they kind of feel predictive to me. I can imagine we get closer and closer to a Ready Player One world. The South Park episode about social media addiction and short form content seems pretty accurate. A surveillance state seems like it could very much happen. You know, like, I've heard some jokes about analog patches where they're kind of like shirts or something that you wear that like don't allow you to go to technology because people are so sick of it. I could see that people are getting so sick of screens that they do go back to, at least some group of humans wants to live more of an Amish lifestyle. I guess like those weird robots that I showed you at the beginning of the video that look very organic and look like they have muscles and gooiness and stuff like that. That's sort of a new thought. But yeah, I could see people really wanting robots like that, even though I've never wanted one and kind of still don't, but it might just happen. Could you imagine couples that don't really fight? They just argue through their AI therapists and then they merge their chat histories and find emotional common ground? Sounds weird. Incompatible algorithms just finding ways for us to get along. Maybe. Can you imagine the subscription economy just goes wild where air, water, sleep, what if you stop paying for them, you don't get access? Your mattress locks you out until you renew it. I know it sounds insane and maybe it won't happen. Definitely, I wouldn't predict this, but yeah, if you have, you know, some sort of Tesla, you know, Optimus robot and it's just like, oh, sorry, I'm not going to let you into your bedroom because that bed's rented and you pay by the day on that, like 10 cents or whatever. Just, can I debit that and then you can go to bed? Maybe. Could you imagine politicians doing ending dances on TikTok? Because if you play with Sora, you can totally imagine that. And they might allow cameos, right? Like, thousands of people might take his cameo of his face and make him like do funny dances and stuff. And you see that. And then he's just like, wow, this gets the visibility out there. It drives people to my campaign page. So he just lets it happen. And that's like one of the main ways people become politicians in the future. What if we get so familiar with being surveilled or spied on that we just get used to it? And there's settings, like the way you do inside of, you know, your Gmail or something, have different settings on how you want Gmail to look. Maybe we're just to the point where, oh, you're constantly spied on. It's like very dystopian, but you get to choose. Do you want like surveillance to be like cozy or minimal or dystopian chic? Or do you like your surveillance to look more like cyberpunk? And we're just, that's like our style of being surveilled, and we show our friends and they show our theirs, and we don't actually address the problem that we're being surveilled and we shouldn't be. The only thing I can predict with certainty right now is that you are going to think about hitting that hype button. I can't predict you're going to do it because especially some of you are on devices where the button's not there. But if you are and you can hit the hype button on this video, let these crazy thoughts get to larger clusters in the YouTube algorithm, that would mean the world to me. Yeah, leave a comment if you have any thoughts on what I was thinking. What like dystopian kind of chic trend do you think would be kind of unthinkable right now but might just become normal in the future? Leave it in the comments and we'll see you in the next video.